Welcome to Ask Psych Sessions, where we ask some of the best teachers in psychology questions from you, our audience. If you would like to send in a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions, all lowercase, no spaces. And here's our next question.
Today, we are going to kick off our series of mini episodes to help those of us who have just found ourselves going from face-to-face classes to online. I'm going to talk today with Dr. Crissa Levin about perhaps avoiding big pitfalls in classes. So I offered up the trio that I'm teaching because they're across the experience for students and have different setups. Does that sound good to you, Crissa?
That sounds great.
All right, so let's take maybe what I think might be the easier one first, which is my research methods class. So for this class, we work with a textbook, and we use Dr. Morling's book on methods. So we've been doing a lot of talking about different types of claims and different validities, and we relate these to primary source journal articles, podcasts. We do a little writing of collecting some data. But class is kind of a mix of me doing a bit of lecturing, them working on application problems, talking about journal articles. So what can you imagine I could do to make the next few weeks terrible?
Sure. So I think one of the things that I'm imagining as people are transitioning from kind of courses that are really meant to be face-to-face and where students have chosen a time to kind of come in and they've chosen to be in face-to-face courses, and then, they're transitioned kind of against their will to these online distance courses, is trying to do a distance course. And I think that it's an iffy thing here, right? Where the best standards of practice for distance courses may or may not apply because of this kind of in the middle of the semester thing that we're finding ourselves in. Some of the standards of distance course practices are that you really want to have like kind of the shorter lectures, right? You want to keep lectures to like 5 minutes. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to apply here. So taking your specific research methods course, which is something that I also teach quite often, I'm wondering if one of the best things that you want to do is keeping your methods lectures, because you're not going to have the time to prepare the way that I do it in my methods course, which is spending the whole summer making these little mini lectures and making these little mini things. Maybe instead you want to keep to regular and finding the right tools and keeping it focused on the tools at your disposal to keep your syllabus intact, instead of kind of throwing everything up in the air and saying you have to start all over to work to the modality, which is what we usually would say to do the best practice in online teaching. So some of the tools at your disposal might be things like using Google Hangouts, using Adobe Connect, using some of these web conference tools, making sure everybody's on mute before they join, and using some asynchronous tools for some of the kind of reading and journal source articles, and using Canvas or your other online kind of sorry, I'm not thinking of the word for some reason.
Your LMS.
Yeah, your LMS, you're exactly, to the best that you can, and really focusing everything in as close back as you can to really what you want people to get in out of that, in ways that kind of connect you back to, really your teaching philosophy, and keeping it centralized to that, because so much is going to come up that you haven't had time to prepare for. That instead we would use the whole summer to prepare for if you're preparing an online class, if that makes sense.
So that's a little bit relieving, right? That I don't need to completely reinvent, that I can keep some things the same. So we have Microsoft Teams, which I think is a lot like Google Hangouts.
Yep.
Looks like I can set a calendar. I can still have them. We can all be together sometimes, but for other things, where it's not essential, they can have, go over answers at other times. So that all feels very realistic.
Right.
The medium one that I think is doable but might be boring is my graduate seminar on memory. So
Yes.
that we present, I'm really trying to work on their presentation skills and data
Sure.
interpretation skills. So we, have a text on a subpart of memory, and then they present kind of 3 to 4 article primary sources a week. It seems like we can do this again on Microsoft Teams, but is that a great idea for us all to be sitting in our houses watching a couple of presentations? Has that worked?
No. So one thing that I might recommend for something like that, where you have a lot of presentations going on, what I've found to be a really great thing to keep people engaged, whether it's for lectures, for presentations, or things like that, especially for people who might not be doing this professionally, is I like to call it a little bit of a scavenger hunt, but it's not actually a scavenger hunt. That's a little bit of a way of sneaking in a quiz where a quiz doesn't belong, is to give people, and you might kind of slightly modify your syllabus for this, to say, as part of your new presentation, why don't you add 5 quiz questions that go with your presentation to keep people listening and engaging and making the presentations asynchronous. Now, of course, this is just one idea that you could kind of implement for something like this type of assignment, but say one way they could do this quite easily with free software is to use the free software Audacity, which is an easy to use audio only software, and they can download that, record the software, and you might want to kind of stress that they don't need to over edit because that can take quite a long time and you don't want to add a lot of stress to these assignments. And then you can upload the audio to every individual page of PowerPoint, for example, which is, what they're probably already used to doing. So they can upload then the PowerPoint to your LMS, have an audio that goes with it, not a lot of extra pressure, something very similar to what they would be doing in class as usual. And so coming full circle back to the scavenger hunt, you've got 5 questions, and they can come in at the beginning as a PDF download and at the end as an auto-graded quiz. And those are things that people can look for throughout the PowerPoint presentation to keep people engaged, to keep people listening for what they might want to be kind of looking for. They're not questions to kind of get you. They're questions to keep people like popping in and paying attention, just little reinforcers to keep people engaged.
So that part sounds better. And then is it then realistic for the 10 of us? So those are all posted some amount before class, but then we do then at the end sort of like do some group discussion to kind of talk about how these pieces are fitting together and how it's fitting with earlier things. That seems like something we can possibly do on a place like Teams or Hangout,
Right.
where we then have a bigger conversation for participation.
Absolutely. And I think as I've been kind of picturing how this might work for people who didn't have time to like really get in there and structure how they want their discussions to work, or like what the, bottom line essence is of a discussion and what you really want to grade or what you really want to care about. I think discussions are one that I've really wondered, how is this going to work? And how do you want to do this? And I think that that's something really that Google Hangouts for a class of 10, I personally would try to do that more on a Google Hangout system as opposed to an LMS written typeset.
I agree. I would far rather listen and chat than have extra grading. So
Right.
this is I'm with you on this. All right, and then the third one, which I think shares some elements with what we talked about for research methods in my grad seminar, but then is going to require maybe a little extra creativity, is we have a course called Laboratory Research Experience, and this is to standardize for students who are working in a lab. So my students are studying memory, and we have students studying mental health stigma. But at the moment, as you might predict, we aren't collecting a lot of on the ground data. So next week we're fine. Students were giving presentations, and I think I might edit your ideas here and use that in our plan. But do you just sort of off the cuff have any notion about how I can be getting them some additional experience? Is this the time to put up some fake data sets to chat? Is it Should I just punt it back to all my faculty's their own labs and say, you just let me know what you're doing with your lab? I wasn't sure if if you've done any sort of what would normally be a real in-person kind of data work online.
Yeah, I actually run a fully distance research lab with undergraduate students. And again, this is a different sort of experience here because I started the lab and spent a lot of time thinking about how we would do this from a distance. And we've modified the studies that we do based on what we can do from a distance. So we don't ever run anything that we can't do from a distance. And that makes it, not impacted by any of the things that are currently coming up right now. We don't have to reevaluate. We don't have to do anything differently. The only thing that's different for us is the fact that, yesterday in lab, we had a lot of really scared students about conferences getting canceled. And whether they should work on their poster presentations. So, besides that, this is a little bit of a different thing. But some of the things that we do work on in our lab pretty regularly are, besides checking in on the studies that are done from a distance, we do a lot of reading. Every semester we choose a topic that we all read together. And we spend the first bit of lab discussing the study, just in general. What did you think about it? What did you like? What did you not like? And then we spend the last bit really slamming it, not slamming the researchers, not obviously taking it personally, but slamming the methods. Like, what would you do if you had it to do over again? What are the limitations? And then we spend the final very small bit of time in our lab saying, let's devise a study that fixes those limitations and then slam our own selves. What are the limitations of what we just designed? What did we not fix in our own fixing? To kind of really get those critical thinking brains going from a methodological standpoint. And that's one thing that everybody can do from a distance. You get a small enough group and you can do this on Zoom, which is what we do. And we just kind of, when you pick a specific literature topic, right now we're actually doing teaching evaluations, and that's what we're doing as a group together. Actually, sorry, that was last semester. This semester, we're actually doing distance education, oddly enough. And so you pick the literature and you go from there. So that's one thing that we do regularly. But when you're getting into the stats and the actual analysis, things like that, one thing that every school can look for if you're not used to working from a distance is see if your school has a Citrix server. And that's a way that you can actually have your students access a lot of the kind of more expensive programs that they aren't used to being able to get to when they are off campus, that they might usually be used to having to go to a lab to access. So things like SPSS are often not accessible unless you're in a lab. But if your school has a Citrix server, they can learn to log into the Citrix server from home and be able to access SPSS from home.
Those are all really just heartening, right? This idea that you're already making this happen, and to really go back and think about the, kind of what are the goals for the students in this class and how can we fit them in now from a different space. So thank you. That is now the wheels are turning. So maybe just one last question, because I think that I'm living a pretty privileged life of small classes this semester. What about the people out there that are suddenly turning their 200-person courses into a sudden distance learning? What is kind of the worst case scenario for them? Let's try to give a little tip for them.
Yeah, I think, honestly, the first thing I'm thinking for these people is, the best practices of distance learning is really that you need to be having small classes, right? You want to be having classes that are no more than, say, 30 students. Honestly, most people say less. And so when you're talking about classes that are much, much larger and you don't have adequate TA support for such classes, then I think the models aren't fitting well. And so I think rule number one is be very kind to yourself. And I personally take the stance, and this is more of a teaching philosophy really, but I take the stance of being honest to my students so that they can be forgiving to me. And, let them know that we're all in this together, and it's going to be okay. And especially for those poor senior students who have to be just terrified right now. But now talking logistically, I think one of the challenges that really comes up for distance teaching is this issue of you have to grade everything. So you can't just do like a think, pair, share and say like go and it doesn't count. Or you can't just do, some of kind of the powerful teaching moves and say, well, it's not about grading. Like you kind of have to grade it and you kind of have to give feedback. Even if it's a pass fail, you kind of have to look at it and say like, well, yeah, but is it even like consistent with what we were talking about? And if it wasn't, you have to give some feedback and say like, hey guys, what's up? What are we doing here? And in this kind of model of what we're currently saying, you're in a little bit more of a panic mode where you haven't prepared, again, your syllabus, you haven't prepared your assignments, your low stakes assignments to be ready for this type of thing. And I think when I'm thinking about how to prepare, like say a 200 course, or even some people have like a 500 course, places like ASU for something like this, I think it needs to be kind of not looking at the distance model and just saying, for example, maybe you do need to give yourself a break and your students a break of saying, maybe you won't look if you don't have time, if you're in that kind of situation, and saying, this isn't that kind of situation. You wouldn't have known what they were saying if you did do that type of like break up together and talk about it. Maybe looking at more models of having students talk to each other, or look at each other's grades and say, can you guys give each other feedback? I think that's a really good idea for those larger courses, for the low stakes assignments. I think looking at discussions as little as possible. I think discussions are they seem in-person courses, these are really easy. In online courses, these are actually very, very time consuming. And that's something that I think people who aren't used to teaching online are not particularly aware of. So some of the things that I would recommend are really focusing on your high stakes assignments and putting your effort there, and really focusing on your teaching philosophy, focusing on the bottom line of what it is that you hope that your students get out of the assignments, and making sure that that lines up with your grading and your time.
Well, that is a great summary, right? Like, what is your philosophy? And making sure that you're aligning, rather than necessarily feeling like, our institution has given us a list of like 30 potential tools, right? Don't jump and insist on using all tools. Instead, take a moment and be thoughtful.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time to help all of us, and especially that you've sort of gone before us and actually have some experience to share. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, anytime. And, I'm hopeful that it can help anybody out there who isn't used to this and is getting thrown into this in just about the worst time in the semester.
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? An opportunity, as I say. All right. Thank you. Yes, I do think it's going to be helpful, not just within psychology, but hopefully for people teaching all kinds of different courses across institutions. So thank you for your time, and take care.
Thank you. Have a good one.